Good evening, everyone. My name is Crystal Shaw. As Carol introduced me, I am on the planning team for Messy Connections, and I am the music director at Transcona Memorial United. I'm going to try to slow down my speaking. It is my pleasure to introduce our last presenter for this evening, Reverend Claire Dawe. Reverend Claire Dawe is a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia who has been involved in 4 different Messy churches since it migrated to Australia. She works in an intergenerational way in order to support everyone's discipleship journey, including her own. She has a passion for justice issues, ethical discussion, and theological reflection. She has 3 grown-up children and is now ministering in a UCA school as chaplain. Welcome, Reverend.
Thanks, Crystal. That was lovely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Big thank you to Graham, who is going to be running the slides for me. And I'll say things like, thanks, Graham, and they will magically appear to the next one. So, Graham, if you could pop up the first slide. Have you? Oh, you have done that. I'm going to put myself on speaker view. You see, he's ahead of me. All right, so I've been asked to talk about Get Messy magazine in particular. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not somebody that will lie and say this is something that you need to buy when it's not, okay? Churches run quite often on the smell of an oily rag. So things like, I've already heard it mentioned today, this is my Messy Science book. Can you, I can't really see that. It's absolutely wrecked and it's full of Post-it notes. That is one that's worth buying. Obviously, anything that Sandy's written in is worth buying. Goes without saying. And Get Messy magazine is worth subscribing to. I've got a presentation. What I know from Sylvia and from Carol that Canadians are really polite people. But if you have a burning question, I'm actually giving you permission to stop me talking. And just yell it out. You can put it in the chat if you want to, or you can just speak it aloud. All right, you can stop me. You can. Australians are not quite as polite as Canadians. You're going to hear through this about the Australian context. I'm wondering if there is alignment with the Canadian. I think there might be. We seem to be quite similar in many ways. But you'll hear about the context. Thank you, Mark. Just proved my point. So our context in Australia is one of a lot of sadness with the First Nations peoples. You'll notice that us Australians have put the land on which we are gathering, on which we are actually sitting today. So I'd like to take the moment to pay my respects to the elders of the Bunurong peoples. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I pay my respects to the elders of your lands where you are meeting tonight. The First Nations peoples in Australia, or the lands that are now called Australia, they had stolen from them their language, their culture, their land and their children. And so this is part of the context that we're working in. And Indigenous leaders, Christian leaders like Brooke Prentice from Common Grace, she teaches us that we can't talk about reconciliation with First Nations peoples unless we talk about climate change. And we can't talk about climate change unless we talk about reconciliation with First Nations peoples. So what you'll hear me talking about throughout this session is the importance of keeping the environment and creation, land, front and central. So being good stewards of the land that we have means that we recycle, we upcycle, we reuse. We go through cupboards, we see what we've got, we go through other people's cupboards, we see what they've got, and rather than buying in new stuff. Another thing that I've actually learned, I've only been in Australia 17 years, but I learned when I arrived here, I came from the UK. We are an intercultural society here, and some of our cultures are very sensitive to food being played with. So what they perceive as food being played with. So I have completely adapted what I do so that we don't produce things like pasta necklaces, and we don't put rice or lentils into bottles to make shakers. We look for alternatives. Something like bread making, that's fine if you're going to eat it as part of the celebration. It's just being sensitive to those things. So you'll notice that context coming through. Thank you, Graham. If you could pop the next slide on. I feel like what I'm doing is kind of like pinching everybody else's presentations now, because I'm going to mention quite a few bits that Sandy has spoken about. You can end up being really overwhelmed. You've listened to Sandy, you've listened to Lucy, you've listened to messy science, and you want to have a go, but you're completely overwhelmed with, well, how do I do it? And that's where Get Messy magazine can help you. It can actually help you do that, connecting with people at a deeper level, so that we all follow Jesus, we all develop in our discipleship and our faith formation. One thing to say is, I'm not an expert in messy church. I am just somebody that's had a go. Some things have worked, some things have not, and that's fine. That's part of the journey. Get Messy magazine is not necessarily something you're going to be able to pick up and take everything that's in it and run with it, because you've already heard Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere, and the changes there. So Easter, for example, Northern Hemisphere, you're going into spring. Well, we're going into autumn. So some of it will need adapting and modifying and changing, but that's okay. That is okay. Thank you, Graham. All right, so what I'm going to do is take one edition of Get Messy magazine, one session. Oh, you've got it. Well done, Mark. One session within Get Messy magazine. It's not from this edition, it's from a previous one, because it's one that I wrote. That means that we can pull it apart and no one is going to be offended. So it is, Get Messy is a subscription resource for messy church leaders. You can get it digital or in print. Please buy as many as you need for your leaders. Please do not buy one print or one digital copy and then copy it and forward it on to others. It's a lot of trust here. Each edition includes 4 sessions, and they are written by different people. So throughout the year, you have 12 sessions, 1 a month. You also have a whole heap of articles around being a messy church leader. So there's a teenagers column. Sandy's just been talking about that, and the leadership development they're doing in that area. There are other training opportunities. There's kind of like a problem page. There's tips, practical tips on filming and things like that. And also it's a way of showcasing all the different messy churches around the world and what they're doing, because that way we learn from each other. So it's kind of like a global resource. Now, before we go straight in to the edition, I just want to touch on the messy church values. So thanks, Graham. Now, I actually pinched this confession. I pinched this picture from the Church of Canada's messy church a couple of years ago for something else I was doing, but it actually shows it really, really easily and very, very clearly how all of the messy church values intersect so well. So I don't know if somebody on the screen actually produced this image. If you did, I'm really sorry and thank you very much. Now, 5 messy church values: Christ-centered, intergenerational. So I use the term, and Australia tends to use the term intergenerational rather than all age. Celebration, creativity, and hospitality. So it's not kind of like a person enters at the top and goes through a flow chart. It's a kind of messy, squiggly line, because all of these values interact with each other. They all weave together. It's very messy. Take hospitality as an example. Hospitality as a value is not just the meal at the end, which one day we will be able to share a meal together. who knows what that's going to look like post-COVID. But it's not just that meal. Hospitality is a value that weaves its way through everything you do, and it starts with the team that you have planning. And that's where engaging everybody, so all ages, all cultures, etc., all together, that is modeling hospitality. The way that you welcome people at the door, and who does the welcoming at the door, the way that you actually explain what's going to happen, you explain the story as an intro, particularly for new people, that's hospitality. Also, the way that you share the Bible story. It's not going to be you necessarily, be a member of your team, but you're modeling hospitality throughout the whole thing. The way that you actually set out the activities so that people can actually get around them. You're saying welcome, you're living out that welcome. So no cliques. We don't do cliques in Messy Church. We have teams of equals, as Sandy said. Intergenerational, I'll just touch on that very quickly because Sandy's done a whole heap on that. When you have a visibly intergenerational team, you are making a statement, and you're making a statement that power does not sit in the hands of one person or one group of people. It's actually shared. And so that actually makes a space safer for our vulnerable people and children. So just think about that. All right. It's a whole mess, really, isn't it? But Get Messy magazine can actually help you through this. Thanks, Graham. All right. Just want to have a shout out to the herd writers who have written for this coming year's Get Messy magazine. So if you subscribe with a 15% discount, you will be able to get, I'm not being paid for this, you will be able to get a Canadian flavour, all right? So you'll have the global resource, but you've actually got some Canadians who are writing for this one. All right, thanks, Graham. This is the edition we're going to go for. And okay, these are the people, this is the first page, inside the cover, and these are the people who have written for this particular edition. Now you can see what 260 days of lockdown in Melbourne has done to my hair, but also you can see there Australians, UK and Denmark. So it's a global resource. You can also see the different denominations that are represented. Each of us wrote 3 sessions so that there were 12 sessions for the year. So we each write 1 for each edition of the magazine, if that makes sense. Right, thanks, Graham. You're not going to be able to read all of this that's on the page, all right? And that, I'm hoping that was going to be a bit clearer, but not to worry. The contents page shows you that the first 2/3 are actually articles, different articles. And that's giving you practical tips. And like I said, you know, what else is going on in the world, what worked for other people, particularly during lockdown, that's been quite helpful. And then at the bottom, you've got the 4 sessions, the 4 months. Now, they are all going to be, the sessions are all going to be topical. So if it's Easter or Christmas, obviously, but things like I wrote one on Jonah and I was asked to connect it to the Olympic Games. So whatever's going on globally, there'll be a connection there. You can build on that. But again, remember what I said, you're not going to be able to lift this in its entirety and bring it over to your own context. Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, your theology, what you're able to do with the team that you have. So it's going to need adapting. It's going to need modifying. But it will give you some practical tips. Thanks, Graham. All right. There are 3 sections for each of the sessions, 3 sections. You have a planning section, you have an activity section, and you have a celebration section. I'm going to spend most of our time on this planning section. You can see here, I was given, actually, you're invited by BRF and Lucy Moore to actually contribute to the Get Messy magazine. And they say, right, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. So I got the Good Samaritan from Luke's Gospel. Anything you need for the sessions, like templates, if somebody's created an activity, for example, Sandy's angel, if that was in here, then there would be a link to the template, so you could actually get it offline. Everything you need from that point of view is there. All right, this is why I'm saying to you, you don't have to feel overwhelmed. All right, remember, it is the process, not the product, which is important. It's the journey that we all go on together. So, planning. We start with, in the magazine, it starts with the Bible story. Pretty good place to start. You always put down which edition of the Bible that you're actually using, just in case there are differences. And for this particular one, I use the NRSV. I don't necessarily use that edition all the time, but I did for this. Then goes on to pointers, main points of the story that you are suggesting that the teams look at and explore together. So remember that your team, if it and being intergenerational, of course it is, and intercultural, your team is going to be sitting down, reading the Bible story together, and then reflecting on the main points. So it's kind of like a Bible study, and you are going to grow in faith. You are going to grow in your discipleship together. So there's mutual learning, that power thing. You're doing this together, a team of equals. Some of these pointers you may actually decide would be really good to include in the activities. You could put them on the tables as conversation starters, things for discussions for the people themselves to share. There is a specific discipleship team section, and this is asking questions like, how am I right now approaching this story? What is going on in my life? What's happened to me today that means I'm approaching this Bible story in perhaps a different way? Or what can I bring? And if everybody there in an intergenerational way is being encouraged to ask themselves that question, imagine the self-awareness that we have within our leadership teams. So you ask yourself the question, you share, you make yourself as vulnerable as you want to within the group. And from there, you build your messy session. Obviously, there's also a discipleship for the families that are attending. And can I just pick up the point? It's not just families that attend. And I just heard somebody else say that. Yes, it's individual people who attend as well. It's not just groups of people. So I suppose some of the language, I think we perhaps need to revisit. There's a whole section on the different mealtime questions that you can put out, prompting the discussion, and also what are you going to do when you go home? What can you take home from here and talk about with other people? There's a question that just keeps you focused. So the question I wrote is, what does being a good Samaritan look like for us? So that's just a question to keep the focus when you're planning, to keep the focus when you're there, to keep the focus for the time of celebration at the end. And I always do, because I'm a social justice nerd, I always have a social justice action. That's obviously optional, but I try to get people to think beyond the session and to beyond into the local or global community. Thanks, Graham. It's funny, I keep going to press the arrow button. It's not working. All right, second section. Is everybody clear on that? Does anybody want to? Oh, have I got a couple of questions there? In the chat. Yes, you can have the picture because it's not mine. I'll send it to you, Sandy. Is everybody clear? I haven't rushed too much. Okay, great. Well, let's move on to the second section then. These are the activities. There are usually 10 activities. That does not mean that you have to have 10 at every messy church. You have as many as you need, or you feel able to cope with. There is always a range of activities, and that's to cover the learning styles that Sandy's talked about. It's to offer a broad range for skills or experience, interest. You know, you have some contemplative, reflective activities. You have some science experiments. And there's even a book actually called, Messy Church book called Extreme Crafts. Now, what we've done in the past is we made ourselves a cross out of branches. We made a communion table, and we made a communion bowl for our camps, so that we had specific items, and they're rough and ready, and they were made by everybody. So children and adults were using drills, etc., with obviously, you know, people watching them and helping them and giving instruction. There was safety, but it involved everybody together. So those items are there for church camps into the future. Remember, recycle, reuse, use what you have. So when we made the communion table, that was actually old fence palings. Somebody's fence had come down, and we just used those. And it was just bits and bobs that people had. For each of the activities, it's very clear. It lists all the items that you're going to need, and it has a description. Now, it's the process, not the product. It's not, no two, if it's a creative thing, no two items are going to look the same, and it doesn't matter. We've seen that from Sandy's photos. What is important is the discussion and the communication that goes on at the same time as the activity is being done. There are some photos to give you an idea of what's going on, some images, action shots, and there are ideas on discussion points that you can have to promote some talking at the table. Now we're going to drill down into one particular activity, and we can pull it apart. Thanks, Graham. I'm so glad you're there, Graham. Okay, so this one is the helping hands one. There's a couple of photos there that didn't appear in the magazine. What do you notice about those hands that are on the screen there in those photos? I mean, the real ones, not the paper ones.
They're all different.
The paper ones, because I was going to say all different colors.
Yeah, all different colors and sizes.
Yeah, all different colors and sizes. Yeah, the paper ones. Yeah.
And ages.
Yeah, all different ages. Yeah. So we've got different intergenerational. This is an intergenerational activity. Now, what I actually wrote for the descriptor is this, and let's see if it worked. Draw around your hands and then cut them out. Can you join them together with other hands and stick them on the card? Try to make a circle or a chain of the hands all linked together. So invitational language, I'm not saying, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is what you do. Because obviously that was never going to work, because I mean, look, the hands are going in different directions for a start. But what they've actually done is had a conversation at the table about helping hands. And then they've stuck their hands on. The activity descriptor, or the talking section that I used, says this. The Samaritan man uses his hands to help the wounded man. And when we pray, we ask God to help us to be God's hands and feet in the world, caring for others. Talk about how it looks when each of us helps in whatever way we can, and how God blesses others through us. Do you have a network of local churches offering support to people in the community? So on each table, I usually put the Bible story printed out so someone can read it. And I have that discussion point. And then what happens is you always get a mixture of people at the activity table. So somebody will know of different churches that offer support, or maybe there's something that they're actually involved with themselves. Maybe it's the children have actually done some collecting of food for a food bank, etc., etc. So there's a conversation that happens. What's important is not the hands going down on the bit of card. Now, thinking about your own cupboards, okay, thinking about what you have in your churches or even your own home, how could you have done that activity differently? Because I actually did it differently to what I actually wrote in the descriptor, because we actually found when we looked in the cupboard that we had these cut out hands already there. So we used them. But how could you can shout out, how could you have done that one differently? You are very.
I remember what we've got in the cupboard.
So in our cupboard, we have one of those stacks of paint chip colors, you know, all of those. And if we taped a few of those together, we would have very multicolored hands.
Yep, well done. And Crystal said that using paper that can't be recycled, nice one, good one. All those scraps, because you've got different sized hands, yeah. Can you see what I'm trying to say here? Just because the descriptor says draw around your hands, you look at that, you go to your cupboard and you think, okay, we've got all that paint. We need to use some of that paint. We've got all this paper that needs recycling. We can use some of that. All right. I mean, even, I know we can't do it now because we're not allowed to touch anybody, but when COVID is settled a bit, there might be something. Oh, sidewalk chalk. Yeah, well done, Shannon. Yep, sidewalk chalk. And leave it outside, like Sandy said with that prayer. It's a witness to others going past. Yeah. But I wonder if you could do something, an activity where you're actually holding hands with the group that you're with.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, hand stamps. Yep. So there's all sorts of things you could do. And if you're working with a team of people of different ages and skills and experiences, you're actually going to get that coming through in your activities and in your planning. Sensory, yes, different sensory needs, because some people will not tolerate anything on their hands. So doing something like a clay activity is not gonna, it's not gonna work. All right. Behind the scenes, so to give you the story of how my activities came about, and that will show you what an intergenerational team can actually produce. I was invited to talk, to write for Get Messy. I was given the 3 areas, the 3 Bible stories, and I came up with some ideas, 10 ideas for each one. So you can imagine 30 activities, right? And I thought, right, let's get some families in to test these. So individuals and families, we had a whole room of people. There's about 7 different groups of people, all different ages. We went through them. So I'd gone through the cupboard, seen what there was, recycled stuff, upcycled stuff, etc., etc. Got these people in the room, explained what we had to do. We had people that were going to take photographs, different ages taking photographs, and these are the photographs you're looking at. And I let people loose on this. And what happened was they tested them and they wrote down, okay, this isn't working, Claire, but this would work. I had young people playing some of the different games I put out, which worked in my head, but they didn't work in practice. So they went through them and just went, nah, that's not working. Let's go in the cupboard, grab some different stuff. This is how it works. And that's what I wrote up. So this was very much, this is not just me and my creative mind working here, actually this is the product of all those people in that room.
Mhm.
And as we worked our way around the activities and actually did the talking points and the discussion points, that in itself was an exercise in discipleship. That in itself was creating that mutual learning space. So I do not recommend trying to organize 30 activities and letting people loose on it. I'm not sure I would ever do that again, to be honest. It was chaos. But in the chaos came learning. And in a smaller way, that's how we plan and develop our messy churches. All right, third section.
That's a very good idea, because we did it ourselves, the whole 30, and it's a lot of work, and we actually built models of everything to make sure it would actually go together and not fall over or whatever like that. And so, but I think that's a really good idea to have a variety of minds working on this, because it's an awfully lot of things to do.
It was a lot of work.
But you can see on a micro level as well, just developing your own, each month for your own messy church, or I don't know how often you do them, but you're getting all those different experiences.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's a good idea to have the bigger mind crowd to help out. Yep.
The brain's trust.
That's right.
Yes.
Because mine's pea size, my brain. All right, next one, please, Graham. So we're moving on to the third section, and this is the celebration time. So we've done planning, done the activities, and now we're on the celebration time. This is the final one. Now remember, celebration is also a value. All right, it's not just the end bit. And also, it's very hard to find language around this, because if we call this the worship time, that would imply that the whole of Messy Church is not worship, and it is. The worship starts, you can see, it starts with the planning. So, because your team is doing kind of like Bible study together. So, I'm not really sure what you could call this bit, but it's kind of like the prayer time, the worship time, the service time, celebration time. When I'm doing activities, I try to have some, like Sandy was saying, have prayer activities that you build upon. So everybody's joining their prayers together. And that means that you might have an acrostic prayer poem that you could bring into the worship space. It might mean that you have prayer crosses or something that you can bring into the worship space. So you set it up, everybody brings their own product, for want of a better word, into the space. Again, that's kind of showing it's not just the person or the people at the front of the church that are curating or leading this worship, it's actually everybody together. Yeah, it's not a performance, we're all doing this together and focusing our attention on God. Our worship is focused on God, not on ourselves or each other. I've used the word suggestion here a lot, because this is the bit that you are going to need to adapt. Your theology, your denomination, your rituals, your rites, they will be different. And so you may be a church that has communion every time you meet for worship, or that's going to look different to this. You have a very simple reflection that is offered in the Get Messy magazine, but it's something just to spark off. The same as the planning section was too. There are prayer suggestions, song suggestions. I mean, you've got Rod now. You know all about the songs and fishy music and everything. And there's a meal suggestion. The meal suggestion takes into account food intolerances and allergies, etc. However, I don't know what Canada's like. I mean, Australia is different from state to state with COVID, but I know in Victoria at the moment we can't even meet actually in Melbourne, but how we're going to have a shared meal, I don't know. I'm not sure how we're going to do this. It's going to be very tricky, but we'll find a way, because we're messy people, and we'll find a way. The way that the Bible story is told. It depends on your community. It depends. Oh, Sandy said she managed it. She managed to get a meal, some sort of shared meal. All right, but very, very carefully. Yeah. You've got to work within the regulations that you've got from your denomination and also your state or jurisdiction. So the Bible story, you can use godly play. You might have used, created the Bible story with Lego models in one of the activities, a drama, a puppet show. You might just have somebody reading it. Just remember to share the leadership of the celebration time, intergenerational. Next section, please. Now, I've actually included pictures of the Danish contribution for Easter here, because I just want to show you how professional some people are when they're writing for Get Messy magazine, and I'm sure the herd riches are going to be exactly the same. You saw the chaos that was mine, and that's because of the way that we did it. But basically, I think mine shows you that you don't have to be overwhelmed. In the chaos, the learning happens. And the discipleship and the faith formation happens. May not happen in the way that you'd intended it to, but that's the messy nature of messy church. Only you know your context. Okay, only you know the experiences of your leaders. Only you know the people who are coming in. So you have to adapt and modify some of these activities, and also the celebration at the end. All right, thanks, Graham. Next one. So where do you purchase your copy of Get Messy magazine? Well, for the next few days, you have, if you go to the website, sorry, Carol, she's shaking her head now. I see, I'm not getting paid for this. Get Messy magazine, if you go to Get Messy Canada, the website, if you go to the tab, a resources tab at the top, and then scroll down, you'll find Get Messy magazine. So all on your own Canadian website, and it takes you through to BRF. Please order the number that you need. I'm going to say it again. Please order the number you need. Please don't just buy one copy and then photocopy it, because this is what supports the work of BRF. And this is what supports the global network of Messy Church. You can have, there's a code for you people, BRF 15. Is that right, Carol?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
BRF 15, and you will get 15% off. Remember, you've got 3 editions a year. You've got 4 sessions in each edition. Global writers. You've also got all of the support material, what's happening elsewhere in the world, what we can learn from each other. Practical tips like filming, problem page, learning opportunities, training opportunities. It's packed full of ideas and practical advice. I said at the beginning, I'm not going to tell you to buy something unless I really think it's worth it, and I've actually bought it myself. Get Messy magazine is worth investing in, because you then will not feel as overwhelmed.